Hey everyone, I hope you're all having a great day and I thank you for joining me again on another video. If you are new to my channel, my name is Lee, and in these videos I talk about what life has been like for me over the past 12 and a half years living life with a traumatic brain injury, or TBI. Now, in my last video, I left off. It had just been a couple months after my final craniotomy, where they had finally put the plastic plate in my head to replace the part of my skull. And I had been weaned off of one of my seizure medications to the point where the doctors thought I was okay to drive myself, to be able to go out and do things on my own without the supervision of others that I had been living under for the past 5.5 months, give or take. Now, at this time, again, I was still active duty in the Marine Corps. And now that I was capable of doing things on my own, capable of doing things without supervision, I had called to check back in with them to see what they would want me to do. It was around mid to late October, early November timeframe when the Marine Reservists usually do their Toys for Tots campaign. So I call, check in, and they wanted me to come in and help out with the Toys for Tots. My main job was to drive around and deliver the boxes that the people would donate the toys in, and to collect any boxes that already had toys in them. So it was pretty easy. Spend most of my day on the road. Sometimes I'd have to make multiple trips back and forth between the reserve center and the shops because the van I was in would get filled with toys. But it was probably the best experience, or the best part of what the next approximate year would be while I was back on active duty or back working with the Marines. Um, Towards the end of the Toys for Tots run, when it was getting closer to Christmas, I had thought that that would have been all I had done with them, because again, I was still recovering from my injuries, recovering from my surgeries, and there's no way that I could have physically went back to being an infantry marine like I was before December of 2009. Now, once Toys for Tots was over and we were all back from our Christmas leave, I pretty much just ended up sitting around doing nothing for weeks, if not the first month that I was there, until the other Marines in the INI unit realized that they had a minion or a bitch pretty much to do all the work that they didn't want to do. Now, before I go further, let me just discuss what an INI unit is. The Marine Corps Inspector Instructor Duty. Now, according to this, the INI Marines, or Inspector Instructors, they work closely with the Reserve Marine leaders at their units. INI Marines ensure that operations run smoothly and strive to keep the lines of communication open between active and reserve Marines. So, if anyone knows anything about reservists, they only drill once a month on weekends, usually. Sometimes it can extend into the week or start on Thursday and end on Sunday. But there has to be an active duty component that is there to schedule the training and make preparations so that when the reserve units come in on their drill weekends, they actually have things to do and training to complete. Otherwise, they would spend half of the weekend trying to plan the things and they would get absolutely nothing done. Now, according to this website, Marines who are assigned INI duty are highly proficient in their military occupational specialties and have the ability to work independently in their tasks as asked of them. It's kind of funny that they leave out the fact that, at least in my situation, they were extremely horrible people as well. Now, again, I was talking about how I pretty much just sat in a classroom for a while until other people realized that they could make use of me, I guess is the best way to put it. I didn't actually have a job at the INI unit. I wasn't stationed there. I wasn't billeted there. I didn't have a job or a responsibility. I was only there because, again, after my injury, my parents didn't want me sent back to Camp Lejeune when I had a giant hole in my head because Marines being Marines, something would have happened and I probably wouldn't have survived being there for that. So I am thankful that they had me sent back home to Syracuse for my recovery. Now, once I was fully recovered, or at least had the plate put in, looking back, I wish that there was a way to get me sent back down to Camp Lejeune to the Wounded Warrior Unit or Wounded Warrior Battalion because, again, things get pretty miserable through the rest of my time in Syracuse. It got to the point where the compound that the Marine Reserve Unit is, it's probably approximately a half a mile in between the closest building or the main building and the furthest building away. Some days people in other buildings would call and ask for me just to come and take out their trash, and by the time I got there, they could have already done it and then continued going back to work. But because I was there, and I mean, I guess I wasn't doing anything else, so what's the point? But at the same time, being a trash bitch for everybody, it wasn't very pleasant. At some points, they would send me out into the training area, have me cut down trees or tear down buildings. Again, for someone that had just survived and had somewhat major surgery in their head, doing things like that where you're putting yourself at danger probably wasn't the best move. A lot of times they would have me, with the help of other INI Marines, loading telephone poles into the back of 7 tons up and over my head. And if you would lose your grip and drop it, and it could have easily, at the very least, put my recovery on hold for a long time, if not much worse than that. During the time that they had me doing all this physical labor and things that I thought was unsafe for me to be doing, um, I had talked to my doctors at the VA because while I was back on active duty, I was still going to doctor's appointments. I was still going to some therapy, physical therapy, occupational therapy every now and then. And I would talk to the doctors there and explain to them what was happening. And they would write letters, write notes to the Marines saying that these things are unsafe for him to do. He should not be doing them. And I would show them to my higher ups at the INI unit, and they would look at them and be like, well, these aren't military doctors. They're not Navy doctors because the Marine Corps uses Navy medical staff. And they just would totally ignore it. And again, I'm in Syracuse. The closest naval medical unit to me was 2.5 hours away in Saratoga Springs. So it wasn't like I could just pick up and drive there during lunch and be like, hey, doc, I need something or this or that. They did have corpsmen at the INI unit, but I won't use her name, but she was all but helpless. She could barely take care of herself, much less take care of anyone else that was there. I believe it was her husband that was in the reserve side, and he was an officer. And I don't remember him necessarily being as incompetent as her, but either way, whenever I gave my grievances to them, either the active duty corpsman or her husband, neither of them seemed to want to or just be able to help me with my concerns. which again leads back to why I wish that I was back at Camp Lejeune for this process, because in an INI unit, I believe there was about 15 active duty people there in Syracuse with me at the time. And when you're on a main base, obviously there's hundreds or thousands of Marines. And when you have grievances, there's ways that you can get them addressed. And I know I'll probably get a lot of hate for this video because they're going to be like, oh, you're in the Marine Corps, the best of the best. And yes, I understand that. And I was very proud of my service in the Marine Corps. But again, when you're putting someone's life at risk for things that necessarily shouldn't be happening, it gets to the point where it's not just, oh, you got to be tough, you got to be strong, you got to, it's one small mistake could have happened doing a lot of the things that I was forced to do, and we would never be having this conversation. And it's just, in my last video when I was talking with my friend Mike, that's just a small example of, I talked about how one of the higher ups wanted me cleaning the back of the LAVs or light armored vehicles, or the things you see in the videos, making amphibious landings and stuff like that. And when I was doing this, I, not intentionally, of course, but they're very small, confined spaces, I'd end up bumping my head and things like that. And even to this day, if I'm getting out of a car and I bump my head, or if I'm walking through the gym and I hit my head on a piece of, it causes extreme pain, and it's very uncomfortable and very not pleasant to deal with. So when I was doing that, when I was cleaning the back of the LAVs, I'd hit my head a couple times, and just, I told the higher up, I believe it was a gunnery sergeant at the time, I told him that I couldn't do it. I wasn't willing to cause myself pain. And again, this early in recovery, who knows what other things I could have been doing to myself. He told me to go grab a Kevlar and get back in there and keep doing it. And so I did it, mainly out of fear of punishment and getting in trouble for not doing things that were unsafe to me. And I'll get to that again later on. And so I grabbed the helmet, I went in, and I was still bumping my head, and it was still causing extreme discomfort. So again, I got out and I told him, I'm like, I'm sorry, I just can't do this. And what he said to me was, oh, if you ever want to do a man's job, come back and see me. It's just like, I don't think cleaning out the back of a LAV is necessarily a man's work. But again, it's not that I don't want to do it. It's that this is causing me extreme pain and discomfort, and I'm not going to put myself through that for something as small and tedious as cleaning out the back of a vehicle. I'm just not going to put myself at risk for that. Now, when I talked about horrible people towards the beginning of this video, there was a few instances where the higher ups got switched out because they were screwing up their own things, and one was sleeping with a younger Marine's wife, and of course that's not okay in any sense of the military. And so we received a new first sergeant, and this first sergeant, I don't know what his issue was. I think that for some reason, maybe because, I don't know, he was never in the infantry or anything like that. He was always what they call a pogue, or a personnel other than grunt. He was always an admin or a supply guy or a cook. I don't know. I really don't. But what I do know is the amount of hatred that he had for me and the other Marines that were there that were infantry Marines. Even the other higher ups, he was a first sergeant, so he was an E8. And so he was a first sergeant, and there were gunnies that were literally one rank below him. and he's talking down to them and saying shit to them. And it's just, for whatever reason, was in his mind that if it was just pure hatred for that, maybe he was just upset that that was a choice that he never made, and he just felt the need to take it out on those who did make that choice. I had a friend that was actually still in Lejeune at this time, and when we were talking, he was saying that the first sergeant that was now in Syracuse was his first sergeant in Camp Lejeune. And my friend was in a recovery unit. He was having his own types of issues that I won't get into. And while this first sergeant was down there, he was still as hateful and bigoted towards my friend and the other Marines that he was in charge of as he was when he came to be in Syracuse. So I don't know if it was just an ego complex that he thought he was better than everyone. I really don't know what it was. But again, he was the highest ranking enlisted person at this unit that I was in, and he made my life a living hell. One day I remember I got to work late, or I got to work on time, sorry. My car was parked outside. I was upstairs. The main building was a 2-story building. I was upstairs in the bathroom, going to the bathroom, and I got back downstairs to the admin office, which at this point in time was my assigned point of duty. And because I got downstairs a couple minutes after 7:30, even though I was in the building, I had seen people, I had checked in, I had said hello to people. People knew I was there, but because I was in my assigned point of duty, which my main responsibility in that room was literally just to sit there and shred papers for hours. But because I was a couple minutes late, he got in my face and he yelled at me and screamed at me and said all these things that I won't repeat, and threatened to administratively separate me or set me up to get in trouble, to get paperwork written against me, so that way it would make it harder for me to collect some of the benefits that I was not necessarily owed at this time, but that I was in the process of going up for a review board for, to see that if I actually rated these benefits. So because I was, again, a couple minutes late, he threatened to possibly ruin a lot of things that could have happened if he had his way. This wasn't the only time that he threatened me with administrative paperwork, but if he had his way, he could have ruined a lot of things that I ended up getting because of my injury and because of the disability factor of having a traumatic brain injury. So again, he was an extremely hateful person. I don't miss him at all. There were times that I would get really bad migraines or I'd get really bad headaches, and they had a little like cafeteria area or lounge, and I'd go sit in there and I'd turn off the lights, because sometimes when I get migraines, a lot of people that have migraines will understand that light and sound sensitivity can be a really big factor when it comes to migraines. So I'd go in, I'd turn the lights off, and I would just sit there and just pray that my head would get better. And he'd come in and find me if I wasn't in, again, my assigned point of duty, shredding papers. Again, it's so urgent that he would come and find me and yell at me and belittle me and talk down to me because he thought I was trying to get out of doing work. I'm lucky in a way with my TBI. Well, no one's lucky that has a traumatic brain injury, but I know a lot of friends that have them that never had surgeries, and I'm thankful that they've never had surgeries. I don't want anyone to live with what I have to go through, even though a lot of people do. But because there's no scars, when you're looking at them, you can't tell that there's something wrong. Even me, I've talked to people, I've known people for months and months and months, and they've never really known that there was something wrong until I said it. But I have a scar. I have a approximate, I measured it one time. I think it was like a 13-inch scar that goes along the side of my head and on the top of my head. And so you would think that anyone that had eyes and anyone that's seen it, I've had people ask me about my scar when I've had a hat on my head because sometimes it still sticks out the bottom of the hat. I've had people ask me about my scar when I've had a full head of hair. But this first sergeant, for some unknown reason, just again didn't care. Just for whatever reason, hated me so much that he couldn't see that, oh, hey, this guy's got a scar. Maybe he's not lying about his issues, and maybe he actually does have a headache, and I should give him some slack because I can only imagine the type of pain that he is going through at this moment. No, none of that ever crossed his mind. And again, he made my life a living hell. Luckily, when I was in Syracuse, there was one good higher up. I believe he was a staff sergeant or a gunnery sergeant he worked in, again, that the furthest building away from the main building where all the first sergeant and the major stayed most of the time. And he would call me down to his office every now and then, not to do anything, not to take out his trash. He was a totally cool and decent person. And I hope if he ever sees this video, he remembers this and he remembers how much I appreciate the small things that he did. He would literally just call me down to his office and we would sit and bullshit, or I'd be able to sit and look at my phone and watch videos and he'd work on his computer. Sometimes we'd play games of chess, but I don't know if he had ever experienced something like what I've experienced. I don't know if he knows people that have or not, or if he was just genuinely a good guy, but he would call the other higher ups and be like, hey, I need Shapley to come down and do this work for me, or I need him to do this for me, or I need help with this. And then literally we'd just hang out in his office, listen to music and watch videos and play chess. And it was, unfortunately, he wasn't there the whole time that I was there. And I think after a couple months, he either retired or moved on to a different duty station. But those little breaks of the rest of the horrible things and just belittling, berating, getting talked down to. Again, I know Marine Corps, you're a Lance Corporal and everyone else is higher and blah, 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 and this and that. And I understand that in boot camp and when you're actually with your unit, I understand the whole hazing. I think hazing is bullshit. And I think that if you screw up, you should get punished. But literally just to be talked down to just because I guess I wasn't wanted. Again, I didn't have a job. I was just the runt of the litter. No one wanted me there. So I think they all just took joy in making me do as much bitch work, as much of the work that they didn't want to do. So they got enjoyment out of making my life miserable. Anyone that was in the Marine Corps, I don't know if the other branches do it or if it's always on a Thursday, but they know that Thursdays are field days. You go around and you clean everything on a Thursday. And there was times that I'd literally be the only one cleaning. I'd have to mop and sweep the first floor, second floor, clean the bathrooms, do all this. And it's, again, I'm not saying that their jobs weren't important, but the fact that they couldn't take 10 minutes, 20 minutes to help me with the thing. Again, I get it. Lance Corporal, they're higher up, blah, blah, blah. But it's just, if I wasn't there, they'd be forced to do it. So it was again just a very, you're made to feel like you're absolutely useless, and it was not a pleasant year of my life. During this year, I would also have to go to the drill weekends, and I was okay with that because you got to interact with the reservist. And I had a friend that I actually went to boot camp with that was a reservist stationed there, so it actually wasn't bad. There was more people around my rank, around my responsibility level, so that way I had more people to talk to and just hang out with and do things with. So it wasn't bad, but when you're working Monday to Friday, Saturday to Sunday, you're hoping to get a day off, and the higher ups, some of them would take Monday, Tuesday, some of them would take Wednesday, Thursday off. But little old me, there was times that I'd work 3 weeks in a row without getting any time off. Again, I know Marine Corps, everyone's going to say, oh, well, uh, we deployed for 7 months at a time. And again, I deployed, I was in Iraq for 7 months, and I'm not trying to complain about just the fact that I had to work for 3 weeks at a time. If everyone else had to work for 3 weeks at a time too, but when other people are able to take time off, and I'm literally, my grandmother died when I was there, and her funeral was at like 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I believe. And I wasn't even able to take the day to get ready and just process the fact that my grandmother was dying. I wasn't even to take from lunch on. I think they gave me like a half hour before the funeral. I was allowed to go home and change. So I had to drive home fast, change real quick, and then get on to the cemetery or the funeral home. And it's just these other guys, they're taking days off like it's cool. I mean, when I would go to my doctor's appointments, I'd go to a doctor's appointment. I'd have to have a note signed from the doctor saying that I was there, saying how long the appointment was, saying what time I left, because they were afraid that I was taking another 20 minutes to avoid being at work. Well, if they were in my situation, they'd be taking 20 minutes to avoid being at work too. Again, I understand, and I am thankful for a lot of my time in the Marine Corps. I've made some of my best friends in my life, some of my best friends that I've had from my time in the Marine Corps. But when you're literally being treated like less than shit just because you're not wanted where you're at, or people can't understand the things that are going on with you, and they're taking days, and you're having to work when people are taking days off. There was a time that everyone else at the INI unit except me and the armor, they went bowling with a bunch of guys from the American Legion, a bunch of like Vietnam vets or World War II vets, or I can't remember who they were, but they were a bunch of older guys from the American Legion. And I understood because I had to stay back and help the other staff sergeant that was there do inventory at the armory. So I'm okay with that, whatever. And then everyone else got the rest of the day off. Again, the next day, everyone came in. The staff sergeant took the day off, and I was again forced to work. And it's just the double standards and what it was like for someone who had again just been through all these traumatic events of my injury, my surgeries, the time with the helmet, getting beat on and belittled all the time with the helmet, to go on and then finally be put back as whole as I could be, even though part of my skull is plastic, to then be feeling like, hey, I'm whole. I can go back to at least somewhat participating in my own life and doing things that I was doing before, to then go and just be, again, not necessarily physically beaten, but mentally beaten over and over, just told how useless you were, and being forced to do all this work that it just made you it made me feel so damn useless. And I don't I don't want any one of them to get in trouble now. But believe me, if there was a way when I was in that I could have, and I know looking back, there are ways and there were ways that I could have done things. But when you're being threatened of being charged administratively and getting in trouble for just showing up to work late because you're in the bathroom, and it's just like you feel like there's no fight that you can give that isn't just going to come back and kick you in the ass twice as hard. One time I was given a task to organize the cafe or the lounge, and I had to take inventory of all the cups and the plates and the forks. And this is all paper shit. This is all not actual utensils, paper and plastic stuff. And I had to keep inventory and write it all down and make a checklist of when to order stuff and when to do this and when to do that. Again, just absolutely useless work. But I had an appointment that day, and my appointment was late enough in the day that I think they had even given me the okay to not come back to work, because by the time I had gotten back there, it would have been about another half hour, and there was no point in me coming back to work that day. So the next morning, we're out in front of the building getting our assignments for the day. And one of the gunnery sergeants, I guess he realized that I didn't complete the task that I was given the day before, again, because I had a doctor's appointment, just decides to go off on this tyrant, like, oh, you pathetic motherfucker, you, and this and that. And I know you got a little bump on your head, but that's no excuse for you not being able to finish the duty that you're assigned. And now, again, I know that my TBI in comparison to other people's injuries is not the worst. Never would I ever try to say that my injury is worse than anyone else. But to say that it's a little bump on my head, and again, I don't remember what happened. I have no idea if I fell out of the back of a pickup truck, if I was hit with a pickup truck, if I was hit with a baseball bat. I have no clue. But to say to someone that's been through so much, again, having 3 somewhat major surgeries, to say that to someone who had been through all these things, oh, you got a little bump on your head, I know you're pathetic and you can't do things. That was, for me, the last straw. After that, I went inside. I went and told the gunny, I'm like, hey, I got to talk. There was another staff sergeant that worked in his office too, but he was one of the nicer ones of the horrible people. I asked him to leave the office, and I literally sat in there for what felt like probably 20 minutes, half hour. It was probably only like 2 or 3 minutes, but I broke down in absolute tears and just screamed and yelled at this. I'm an E3 Lance Corporal. He's an E7, so he's 4 pay grades higher than I am. And I just screamed and yelled and just bitched and said, hey, just let me explain this to you. Like, before, I wasn't the best Marine by any stretch of the imagination, but I had done all these extra trainings. I was trying to improve my standing in the Marine Corps. I had done all these things. And after the surgeries, explaining all the trauma with the helmet and all that stuff, and I was covered in tears, just yelling and just how pissed off I was at him. And afterwards, he just said to me, you're a mess, go get cleaned up. And that was it. But ever since that day, at least he treated me with some respect. And I mean, that's all anyone ever asks for, is respect, is to be treated fairly. And I don't know if I should have done that months before I had ended up doing it. I don't know if that was, I mean, life didn't necessarily become perfect for me after that day, but at least when I was dealing with that one particular gunnery sergeant, he understood just a fraction of the things that I had experienced. And things had gotten somewhat better. In the Marine Corps, there are things called light duty and limited duty. And this is part of why what I was being forced to do, maybe not the paper shredding, maybe not the bitch work, but the physical labor and the things like that, and just being there just to be people's pets and do all the work for them. When Marines get injured, as Marines do, before my TBI, I had tore my rotator cuff and I was put on light duty. And there were some things that I literally was not allowed to do because the Marine Corps, once you're injured, it is in the best way for the Marine Corps to get you recovered as quick as possible, because when you're injured, you're not doing anything. You're not helping the mission of the Marine Corps at all. So they want you to get recovered as quick as possible. So they make sure that, hey, okay, he's got a legitimate injury. Don't let him do these things because he's got to heal up. And then once he's healed, we'll take him off of light duty and then he'll go back to doing everything he was doing before. And then there's limited duty, which I believe is just only difference is probably the amount of things that you can do, but the time that it lasts. I believe light duty was every 30 days, you had to get it renewed. And then limited duty was every 6 months, you had to get it renewed. And again, you had to get it renewed by naval doctors. Unfortunately, the civilians at the VA in Syracuse, even though they were medical doctors, of course, they weren't Marine Corps or Navy doctors. So again, the Marines at the INI unit or the Marines at the Reserve Center didn't really care what they had to say because they were civilians. I mean, it doesn't make any sense to me either, but I guess that's just how the system works. And, or at least that's how their system works. And again, especially with the conditions of my injury, the plate and things like that, I should have been on limited duty since day one of going back to check in with the unit. But again, the corpsman there, the enlisted corpsman, she was all but useless. Her husband wasn't much better. But luckily, towards the end of my time, I can't remember if it was my mother got in touch with the Wounded Warrior Network or Wounded Warrior program that you see all the commercials for on TV. And the gentleman there, he was very helpful in getting me connected to the proper Navy personnel that were high enough in their fields or in their billets that they could get me written up or get me the proper paperwork to get the proper type of care and stuff that I needed. One of the best things that happened to me when I was in the INI unit was that somehow the major had acquired a few SMAWs, or shoulder launched multi-purpose assault weapon. It's a rocket. It just happened to be one of the things that I was trained on in my years previous to my injury. And it was something that at least I thought that I was somewhat proficient in. And I don't know if the major had the same ideas, and maybe he just at this point finally had a little bit of respect as well. But once he had acquired those, he took me into his office. He's like, "Hey, you know this stuff. You were trained in this stuff. I want you to train the reservists in how to use this rocket." And that was finally the first time since I had been there that I felt that I had had a purpose to do something meaningful at that unit. And it was just, I was so happy. I got to go down to the armory. I got to check out some of the rockets and refamiliarize myself with them. I did a lot of research. I looked up a lot of stuff online and found some old books that I had on training manuals and stuff. And I came up with a pretty decent PowerPoint. I wish I was able to find it just so I could look at it myself. And one day on one of the drill weekends, I was able to teach a group of reservists how to use the rocket launcher, the one that I was, like I said, specifically trained in. My father at the time, he was still a naval reservist, and he was the Marine Corps Reserve Center and the Navy Reserve Center were literally right across the street from each other. So he was able to talk to his chain of command, and I was able to talk to my chain of command, and he was able to come and sit in on that class that I gave. And to this day, he says it's one of the best classes that I ever gave. Whether or not that's true or he's just being my father, I have no idea. But then over the course of the next month or two, whenever I had those reservists or whenever those reservists were there, we would go out into the field and simulate training, the same type of stuff that I did before my injury. We would have one guy have the launcher and one guy have the rocket and simulate loading it and the process of how to actually fire the rocket. And we would do that over and over and over until I was comfortable. And I think I was unsupervised doing this. I think that, again, maybe at this point, the major had enough faith in me that I could do something. And I was solely in charge of this. There wasn't anyone else there. Again, we weren't firing the rockets at this point in time, but just the going from being belittled and berated to actually being put in charge of something, that was, again, one of the boosts that I needed to actually feel like I was helpful, have a sense of worth. And then after all the training and stuff like that, one weekend we were up in Fort Drum, and I got to actually stand and watch and supervise RSO, range safety officer. I got to stand and supervise all the reservists while they were shooting off the rockets. And it was probably one of the coolest things that I've done in the Marine Corps in general, but definitely the coolest thing that I ever got to do while I was working with the INI Marines. And it was just so much fun. Probably shouldn't have done it because the concussion from the rocket in my head and everything, looking back, and it was probably a really horrible idea and could have screwed me up in a lot of ways. But I was just so happy at that time to be able to do something that meant something, that I didn't care. And it was just such a great time and a great experience. And I am thankful for that. Again, I thank you all for joining me. I hope you enjoyed the video or possibly learned something from the video. And I hope to see you all again. Have a good one.